The Earl of Marion chose the brightest afternoon of August to tell Cordelia he meant to marry another woman, and he chose to say it in her father's rose garden where the bees were too loud and the air too sweet for grief. "You must see, it is impossible now," Crispin said, turning the brim of his hat in his hands. Beyond the yew hedge, the gardener's shears went snick, snick, patient and indifferent. Cordelia did not flinch. She felt the edge of each pearl button of her glove pressing into her wrist, and she held to that small discomfort the way another woman might hold a railing. "You left a card with my mother this morning," she said. "You sat half an hour drinking her Madeira. Did you not plan that?" He looked down at the gravel. He had the grace at least to go pale. He was handsome, broad through the shoulder, fair-haired, the kind of face that made girls forget their steps, and she had loved that face for 2 seasons. She watched it now and felt the love in her go quiet like a candle pinched between 2 fingers. "You wrote to me from Bath. I know what I signed. Your servant always, always, you used the word." She was 24 and she had just been set aside for a widow. She did not yet know that before the summer closed, those same 2 words would come back to find her in a hand she had never met, in a room she had never entered, and would force her to choose between 2 men who each told her only half the truth. "Selina and I did not plan it," Crispin went on when the silence had gone on longer than he could bear. "These things are not planned." "You let her speak of the breakfast at Marion Park," Cordelia said. "The bride's chamber she means to do over in primrose yellow. She is choosing curtains, Crispin, for a house you now mean to give a mill owner's widow. Do not tell me nothing was planned. You planned the very color of the walls." The word landed where she had aimed it, and he had the decency to color along the throat. "You needn't make it ugly," he said. "I am not making it anything. You have made it. I am only saying it aloud so that one of us in this garden is honest." He had come with a speech. She understood some gentle managed thing, in which she wept a little and forgave a great deal and let him ride away the wounded party. But she had not wept, and the speech had nowhere to go, and so, at last, he did the thing he had truly come to do, which was to make her the cause. "You measure everything, Cordelia," he said. "You cannot help it. A man wants to be loved and not assessed. With you I was always being weighed. Selina does not require me to be anything but easy." There it was. The shears stopped somewhere behind the hedge, and in the sudden quiet she felt the insult settle into her cold and exact, and she understood that this was the sentence he had ridden out from London to say. All the rest had been the wrapping around it. He had needed her to be too clever, too cold, too watchful, so that he might walk away pitying her and be comfortable in it by supper. "I see," she said. "Cordelia, no. You have explained yourself very thoroughly." "You were always thorough," he said, "when it cost you nothing." She drew a breath and the rose scent flooded her, gone thick and almost rotten in the heat, and for one moment the garden swam. But the pearl buttons held her. "You may go out through the side gate," she said. "My father is in the library. I will spare you the meeting." I hesitated, as though he had expected something he might comfort, and did not know what to do with a woman who simply stood. Then he bowed a shallow, correct bow, the bow one gives an acquaintance met in a shop, and he set the gray hat back upon his fair head before he had even reached the gate and went his boots loud on the gravel. Cordelia stood among her mother's roses until the sound of his horse had faded down the drive. Only then did her hand come up to her mouth, and only for a moment, and then it went down again to smooth her skirt, because a footman might come, and a Ravenshaw did not weep where the staff could carry it to the kitchen by supper. She was 24, and she had been set aside for a widow, and the worst of it, the very worst, was that even now some cold clerk at the back of her mind had already begun to reckon how long before the town knew and what it would cost. By morning the town knew. She read it in the cards. 3 ladies who had promised to dine on Thursday left their regrets instead on small stiff rectangles of pasteboard, each excuse more delicate than the last. A sudden megrim. An aunt arrived unlooked for from Shropshire. The heat. The heat had not troubled any of them on Monday. Cordelia laid the cards out in a row along the breakfast cloth and read them the way a general reads a map of ground already lost. Vultures, said her Aunt Sybil, helping herself to a great deal of marmalade. I have always said it. The instant a girl so much as stumbles, they descend with their condolences and their very best bonnets, the better to be sure of a clear view. Lady Sybil Merton was a wide, handsome woman of 62, who wore a black wig set slightly askew on principle, and who had buried 2 husbands and outlived most of her enemies, which she counted the chief pleasure of a long life. Eat something, child. You cannot fight a war on dry toast. I'm not fighting a war, Aunt. No. Then you have already lost it. Sybil pointed her knife across the table. When I was jilted, and do not look so, every woman worth knowing has been jilted at least once. I went directly to the opera in my finest garnets and laughed twice as loud as anyone in the house. The trick is to be seen enjoying yourself. It enrages them far more than tears. Her small, bright eyes settled on her niece. You loved him. I thought I did. That is worse. Thinking is harder to cure than loving. Sybil buttered another corner of toast and pushed it across the cloth. Your father is in a state, you know. The Marion match was the prop he leaned the whole house against. Cordelia knew. She had heard it through her dressing-room wall the night before, the low, grinding sound of her parents' voices, her father's especially. The Earl of Ravenshaw, reduced to a man pacing his own chamber and counting debts aloud in the dark. The Ravenshaws were old and titled and very nearly empty. The estate in Kent bled money the way a cut bleeds steadily and without drama, and the 9,000 a year that Marion would have brought had been the bandage they had all agreed not to speak of. He will want to see me, Cordelia said. I will want a great many things, said Sybil, and her voice gentled, which from her was alarming. Go to him. And Cordelia, do not let him marry you off to the first creature who offers only to mend the books. A girl thrown over once may recover. A girl married wrong recovers never. Cordelia Rose kissed the soft, powdered cheek that smelled of violets and snuff and went to find her father. The library at Ravenshaw House in town was the coolest room in summer, its shutters half drawn against the glare, the air thick with leather and old paper. The Earl stood at the window with his back to the door, a small man grown smaller, and he did not turn when she came in. You will have heard, he said. Most of London has heard, Papa. He came to me himself. Marion. A dry, terrible little laugh. He came to tell me he would settle 2,500 on you by way of apology, as though you were a mare gone lame in his stable, and he was being decent about the loss. The Earl's hands were behind his back, and she saw how they gripped each other. I told him to take his money to the devil. Papa, I should not have. We need it. He turned at last, and his face undid something in her chest, because he had been a vain and cheerful man all her life, and looked neither now. I have failed you, Cordelia. I have managed everything so badly, and now you must pay the reckoning, and I do not know how to mend it. There is 9,500 owing the most of it to a wine merchant and a builder in Bath, and there is nothing behind it now but the name. She crossed the room and took his cold hands in her gloved ones. We will contrive, she said, with a steadiness she did not feel. We always contrive. Neither of them believed it. Outside over the rooftops, the bells of a church struck the half-hour bright and careless ringing for nobody at all. The Marchioness of Roxwell held the last great crush of the season on the Friday, and Cordelia had every reason in the world not to go, which was precisely why she went. Be seen, enjoying yourself, she told her reflection, fastening her grandmother's garnets at her throat. The stones lay against her collarbone like warm drops of wine. Her gown was deep amber silk, the color of brandy held to candlelight, and it made her dark hair darker and her gray eyes very nearly gold. When she came down the stairs, Sybil put up her glass and said, There, now you look like a woman who has lost nothing at all, which was the kindest lie either of them had told that week. The Roxwell house blazed. 200 candles in the long gallery hothouse lilies banked white against every pillar, the heat of so many bodies in silk turning the air heavy and floral and faintly damp. Cordelia walked into it with her chin level and felt the room turn toward her the way a field of barley turns in the wind. The small adjustments. The fans lifted to cover moving lips. The eyes that found her and slid away. She had expected it. Expectation did not blunt it. Each glance was a small, cold pressure between her shoulder blades, and she kept her smile fixed and her step unhurried and thought snick, patient and indifferent. She lasted 40 minutes. She danced once with a kind, elderly baronet who had known her father as a boy. And she watched the Earl of Marion come into the gallery with Mrs. Selina Harkness on his arm, the widow resplendent in peacock blue and triumph. And she watched the crowd open to receive them and close again, and she understood that they had come precisely because she would be there. The world had arranged its small cruelty and pulled up a chair to watch. So she did the one thing no one expected. She set down her glass, inclined her head to the baronet, and walked out, not toward the cloakroom and the carriages where the gossip would follow her down the steps, but through a side door into the long, dim orangery, where the music thinned to a far-off sweetness, and the air went suddenly green and cool with the smell of citrus leaves and wet stone. She was not alone. A man stood at the far end among the orange trees, tall in plain, dark evening dress. His hands clasped behind him, looking up through the glass roof at a sky going violet with the last of the light. He did not start when she entered. He only turned his head unhurried and regarded her with frank, dark eyes, and said in English, shaped by some warmer and more distant cadence than London gave, "You are the woman they are all whispering about." "I am the woman they are all enjoying," Cordelia corrected. "There is a difference, though. It is fine." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. He was perhaps 28 broad, through the shoulder black-haired with a grave and arresting face. Not handsome in Marion's polished way, but something harder and more interesting, a face that looked as though it had been struck for a coin and struck hard. "Forgive me," he said. "I did not mean it unkindly. I watched you come into that room. You walked as though it were your own ground and not ground you had borrowed. I have spent a great deal of my life watching people come into rooms," he went on. "Most of them are afraid, and I am not." "You are very afraid," he said, "but you have decided it is no one's business, which is a rarer thing." He came a step nearer, and the green light moved over him. "The gentleman who set you aside is a fool." Cordelia went still. "You know the Earl of Marion. I know that any man who would put you down for that lacquered widow in the peacock feathers cannot count past 10. He said it plainly without flirtation, the way a man states a sum. I have been 3 weeks in your city, and I have watched a great many of your gentlemen trade their futures for an afternoon's ease. He is only the most public of them, and by some way the worst." She ought to have been affronted. A strange man alone with her in a glass house, speaking of her ruin as though it were the weather. Instead, she felt, and the feeling startled her, that for the first time in a week, someone had told her the truth without first arranging himself to profit by it. "You have the advantage of me, sir," she said. "You seem to know my circumstances entirely, and I do not so much as know your name." "No," he agreed, "you do not." And he smiled just slightly and turned back to the violet glass and left the question hanging in the citrus-scented dark. She learned his name the next morning, and she learned it from her father, and she learned it on her feet in the library, with her heart going hard against her stays. Cordelia. Her father had a heavy cream-colored sheet in his hand, and the seal it had borne lay broken on the desk between them. Red wax, deep and glossy, stamped with a device she did not know. "Do you know whose hand this is?" "No, Papa." "It came by a servant in a livery I've never seen. Gray and bottle green." He sat down rather suddenly, as though his legs had stopped consulting him. "It is from the household of a Mr. Gabriel Wren." The name meant nothing to her, and then, from the previous night, it meant a great deal. He is the claimant, Cordelia. The Raysbury business. Half the coffee houses have been full of it since the spring. A barony and a great West Indian estate, and 2 families at law, over which shall have it, and this Mr. Wren is one of the 2. And he writes, The Earl looked up, his face gone strange. He writes to request the honor of calling upon you by name. The orangery rose up whole in her mind. The green light, the struck coin of a face, the unhurried voice. You do not so much as know my name. No, you do not. I was at the Roxwell ball, Cordelia said faintly. You spoke to him. Cordelia, you spoke to the Raysbury claimant and did not think to mention it. I did not know who he was. He declined to tell me. A small, wild urge to laugh climbed her throat and she put it down. He said the Earl of Marion could not count past 10. The Earl stared, and then for the first time in a week, something flickered behind his eyes that was not despair, a terrible, hopeful, calculating spark that she recognized at once because it lived in her too, the Ravenshaw habit of measuring. He is calling at 3, her father said. He is calling here, today. He came at 3 exactly, and the gray and bottle green servants waited in the hall, and Mr. Gabriel Wren sat in her mother's drawing room and drank tea he plainly did not want. He was courteous to her flustered mother and grave with her father, and all the while he watched Cordelia over the rim of his cup with the same frank attention he had turned on her among the orange trees, as though she were a problem he had already half worked out. When the tea was done, he asked with perfect composure to speak with Lady Cordelia alone, and her parents, scandalously after the briefest glance between them, withdrew. You will think me very strange, Mr. Wren said the moment the door had closed. I already do, Cordelia said. He set down the cup. The afternoon sun came gold through the window and lay across the carpet between them, and the room smelled of beeswax and cooling tea and the heavy sweetness of the lilies on the mantel. I will not waste your time with the long approach, he said, because I think you despise the long approach. I came to England to win a lawsuit and to find a wife. I have very nearly done the first. I have come to you about the second. Cordelia's hands had gone cold in her lap, but she kept her face still. You are direct. I am obliged to be. He rose and moved to the window and stood in the gold light the way he had stood in the orangery, as though light were a thing he was used to being looked at within. There is an estate in the parish of Clarendon in Jamaica that was my grandfather's, and a barony that goes with the land, and both were kept from my branch of the family by a lie told before I was born. I have spent 4 years and the better part of my fortune bringing the matter to law, and I will have it. But there is a difficulty that no lawyer can mend for me, and it is this. I am a man with a Jamaica accent and a claim that half the drawing rooms in London call grasping. When the matter comes before the commission, the men who decide, it will be asked quietly whether Gabriel Wren is quite the sort of person one wishes to see raised to a barony. And that question, Lady Cordelia, is not answered in a courtroom. It is answered in rooms like this one. The commission, she said. He turned. You will have heard of it. The government has undertaken to pay the owners of the freed people now that the holding of them is ended. Millions of pounds shared out among the planters by a board of commissioners sitting here in London. Since the 1st of the month, it is the law of the land. He said it without ornament and did not soften it. A part of the Raysbury estate is a claim upon that money. It is not clean money. Lady Cordelia and I will not stand in your mother's drawing room and pretend it is. It is the price the nation has set upon people my grandfather owned, and I have not finished thinking what a man ought to do who inherits such a thing. But it is coming to whichever family the commission names the rightful heir, and I mean that family to be mine and steadied before the naming by exactly the kind of marriage no one can sneer at. I had told it to her plainly. All of it, the grasping and the barony and the blood on the coin, and she found she believed him precisely because he had not tried to make any of it pretty. And you have decided that I am the marriage no one can sneer at, she said. You are an old name and a clever woman who can hold a room, said Mr. Wren. And you have just been cured, I think, of any appetite for the softer sort of proposal. The Earl of Marion counted your measuring against you. He said it as a man reads a figure off a page, and it went into her exactly where Marion's words had gone in the same place, but reversed made into a coin instead of a wound. I counted the whole of your worth. I watched you walk into the Roxwell Gallery, knowing the whole of London had come to feed on you, and I watched you give them nothing. I do not want a girl who weeps, Lady Cordelia. I want a woman who reckons." The breath went out of her. "You understand what you are offering. You are a stranger. I met you in a glass house for the length of one conversation. And in that conversation I told you the truth and asked nothing of you," he said. "That is more than you have had from anyone since the rose garden, I should think." He inclined his head. "I do not ask you to decide today. In exchange for your name and your steadiness, I offer you the settlement of your father's debts entire, and never again the smallest necessity of caring what a woman like Mrs. Harkness thinks of you. And one thing more which I offer, because I think you will understand it where another woman might not." He paused. "When we married, everything you brought and everything you are would pass by the plain law of the land into my hands. A wife owns nothing. I would not have it so between us. I will have my lawyers settle upon you an estate that is yours separately and absolutely to your own sole use that no act of mine can touch. Whatever else I am, Lady Cordelia, I will not be one more man who owns you." She had not expected that, and he saw that she had not, and had the grace not to smile at it. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked into the silence. "Why tell me of the settlement," she said slowly, "when you might have bound me first and been generous after? Because a man who is generous after has already shown you what he has said. Mr. Wren, I would rather show you now." He took up his gloves. "There is a great deal I have not told you, because a drawing room with your mother's ear at the door is no place to tell it. But you have asked me nothing false, and I have answered you nothing false, and I find that is a rarer beginning than most marriages are given. Consider it. I will call again when you have had time to reckon." And he bowed deeper than Marian had ever bowed to her, a bow that meant it, and was gone before she had found a single word, and the lilies breathed their heavy sweetness into a silence that roared. He did not have to wait long for the town to hand her the next difficulty. It came 2 days later, and it came in the shape of Marian himself, who did not write for leave to call, but simply arrived one afternoon with his gray hat in his hand and his fair face arranged into something he plainly believed was concern. The footman who had carried the small cards of regret only days before and forgotten nothing admitted him with a face like a shut drawer. "You should not have come," Cordelia said, when she had let him stand a moment in the middle of the drawing room without offering him a chair. "I had to. Cordelia, what I am hearing in every house in London, it cannot be true. The Raysbury claimant. They are saying he has offered and that you mean to accept. And if I do, then you have lost your senses." He took a step toward her, and the old scent of him reached her sandalwood and horses and stirred nothing now but a faint cold memory of having once been undone by it. "You do not know this man. 3 weeks he has been in the country. His whole fortune is a lawsuit that half the Chancery Bar expects to come apart in his hands, and the estate behind it. Do you know what that money is? You would tie your father's name to sugar and to slaves and to a colonial adventurer who may be ruined before Christmas." "You are remarkably well informed," Cordelia said, "for a man whose chief study these past weeks has been the refurbishment of a bride's chamber in yellow." The color went up his neck. "That is unworthy of you." "No, it is exactly worthy of me. You taught me the worth of it yourself in my father's rose garden on the brightest afternoon in August." She kept her voice level, and the levelness was a blade, and she watched it go in. "You did not come here afraid for me, Crispin. You came afraid for yourself. You set me aside for a widow and an easy life, and expected me to retire quietly into shame where you might pity me from a comfortable distance and think yourself the better man. And instead, there is a claimant to a barony calling at this house, and if his suit succeeds, you will one day stand in some crowded room and watch me raised above you with everyone you know looking on. That is the mistake you came to mourn. Not mine, yours." He stared at her, Somewhere below, a costermonger cried strawberries thin and bright through the half-open window. "He does not love you," Marian said at last, very low. "You know that. A man like that. He is using you. For your name, for the look of the thing, before his commissioners. You will be a piece of furniture in his house, Cordelia. An old English chair he has bought to make a new fortune look older." "And what was I to be at Marion Park?" she asked. "A bandage on my father's books that you tore off the moment something easier came along." She crossed to the bell and rang it. "At least Mr. Wren has been honest about what he wants of me. You never managed even that. You let me believe it was love for 2 whole seasons because it cost you nothing to let me. Good day to you. James will see you out, and do take the side gate. I find I have developed a taste for symmetry." He went white then, and put the gray hat on his head before he had reached the door. The same careless habit, the same small insult of it, and Cordelia stood very straight until the street door had closed behind him. Only then did she sit rather suddenly and find that her hands were shaking not with grief, but with the strange new violence of having been believed by no one and having answered anyway. The lawyer came at 6 unannounced, which was its own kind of message. He gave his name to the butler as Mr. Josiah Pell, and when he came into the drawing room, Cordelia understood at once that here was a careful man. He was perhaps 50, silver, fair, precise, with a mouth that had clearly never once said anything it had not first weighed for profit, and pale gray eyes that missed nothing. He bowed with exact civility. He declined refreshment. He waited with great courtesy until her father had been drawn from the room by some instinct the Earl himself could not have named, and then he turned to Cordelia and smiled, and the smile did not reach the eyes at all. "Lady Cordelia, I am the solicitor to the other party in the Raysbury cause." He said it as another man might name a modest profession. "I have served the Vane family and its interests for 30 years. I have come to speak with you as a friend, if you will allow a plain man the liberty." "You have come without an appointment at the dinner hour," Cordelia said, "when Mr. Wren's offer to me is not 2 days spoken of. I do not think you have come as a friend, Mr. Pell. I think you have come to frighten me. Pray do it directly. I have had a long week of men arranging themselves before they wound me, and I find I prefer the wound." Something flickered behind the pale eyes, surprise perhaps, even a cold flick of respect. He inclined his silver head. "Very well, directly." He folded his gloved hands. Mr. Wren's suit at law rests upon setting aside the claim of a lady. There is a Miss Cassandra Vane of the older branch of the family whose right to the Raysbury estate is a matter of record going back many years, and whose people command a great deal of sympathy among the very commissioners Mr. Wren must persuade. And there is more than the estate between them, Lady Cordelia. There was an understanding. Miss Vane believes herself, and has long believed herself, promised to Mr. Wren in marriage. She believes it still. The lilies, the beeswax, the last thin cry of the strawberry seller, all of it seemed to thin and recede. "I told me there was the difficulty in the suit," she said. "He did not tell me there was a woman." "No," said Mr. Pell softly. "I imagine he did not. He is fond, you understand, of telling the truth, one careful piece at a time. It is a habit that has served him at the bar. It will not serve you as a wife." He drew on his gloves, finger by finger, and she watched the gesture and thought it a lawyer's mannerism, a whole profession's way of arming the hands. Marry him, and you make yourself the public instrument by which an honest woman is stripped of her inheritance and her promised husband both. You will not be a bride, Lady Cordelia. You will be the knife. He rose. "I say this not to distress you. I say it because, unlike Mr. Wren, I have paid you the courtesy of the whole truth at once. Consider whether a man who feeds you the truth in slices is a man whose whole plate you wish to sit down to for life. Good evening." And then he was gone, and the room was very still, and Cordelia stood alone among the cooling lilies, with a name turning over and over in her chest, like a stone she could not put down. Cassandra Vane, who believes herself promised still. She did not sleep. She sat by her window through the short summer dark, and somewhere near 3, she heard faint and clear across the sleeping square. A clock strike the half-bright and careless and indifferent, and for once it did not steady her at all, because she had seen the shape of the thing she had almost stepped into. She had been thrown over in a garden to spare a man discomfort, and now she was being offered up in a drawing room to work exactly that same cruelty upon another woman, and to be called a bride while she did it. The mirror of it was so exact that something in her recoiled from her own reflection. And underneath the recoiling, quieter and colder and harder to forgive the clerk at the back of her mind went on with its reckoning all the same. 9,500 owing, a father who could not sleep, a settlement that was hers absolutely, that no act of any man could touch. She lay in the dark and hated that she was still counting and counted. In the morning a note came on heavy cream paper. She now knew at a glance, sealed in glossy red wax with the crown device she had learned belonged to a barony, not yet his. I am told Pell called upon you. I am told a great deal. It is the chief occupation of any household with a suit at law. Whatever he has said to you, it is some part true and some part poison, and I cannot untangle the two for you in ink. Ride with me. There is a quiet hour in the park before the fashionable world wakes, and I would rather you heard the dangerous things from me. G.W. She went. Of course she went. Sybil, finding her in the hall in her green riding habit at 7:30, took one look and said, "Only, keep one foot on the ground, child, and let her go." The park at that hour was washed clean and empty, the dew still gray on the grass, the great trees hanging heavy and motionless in the windless heat already gathering. He was waiting where the tan track ran beneath the limes, mounted on a black horse, plainly dressed bareheaded. He turned the horse alongside hers without a word, and they rode a while in the green hush, the only sounds the creak of leather and the soft fall of hooves, and somewhere a blackbird working its way through the morning. "You did not tell me her name," Cordelia said at last. "No. You said you would not lie to me. And then you sent me to bargain over my own future without the one fact that signifies most in it." She kept her eyes on the track. "Miss Vane believes herself promised to you. Mr. Pell tells me I would be the knife that cuts her out of her inheritance and her marriage both. You let me sit up half the night thinking myself the very thing that was done to me in that rose garden." That reached him. She saw his hands tighten on the rein, saw the black horse toss its head at the check, and when he spoke, his voice had lost for the first time since the orangery its smooth certainty. "It is not the same," he said, "and it is exactly as bad as you fear, and both of those are true at once, which is the whole misery of my position." He drew the horse up beneath the limes and turned in the saddle to face her, and the struck coin of his face had cracked, and what showed beneath it was younger and far more frightened than any man of his composure was permitted to be. "Cordelia, there is a thing Pell did not tell you because he does not know that I know it, or because he knows it and means to keep it for last. Miss Cassandra Vane is not a wronged woman waiting upon my honor. She is the whole hinge of the other party's claim. The understanding they speak of was never an alliance. It was a bridle they meant to fit to me." "Explain it," she said, plainly. "The Raysbury estate came to the Vane branch 30 years ago," he said. "By a settlement I have always believed a forgery drawn to keep my grandfather's line out of what was ours. But the freedom money changes everything. When the commission names the rightful owner of the Clarendon estate, it names the owner of a very great sum of ready cash, and the Vane fortune is not what the world supposes. There are debts behind that great house that would frighten even your father. Pell has spent this last year contriving to have the estate confirmed to the Vanes before the fraud can be proved. And the surest way, the way that would make my own claim look like the spite of a rejected suitor and not the right of a wronged heir, was to have me marry Cassandra Vane. Once married, I could not sue my own wife's house. That is the bridle." He looked at her steadily. "I never offered for her. There is an old foolish letter they will make a great deal of, and I will not pretend it does not exist. But I came to England to break that settlement in open court, and looking for the one weapon their scheme has no answer to. A marriage they cannot forbid into a name they cannot sneer at to a woman they cannot frighten. And then I walked into the Roxwell Orangery and found you. The blackbird had stopped. The heat hung. Cordelia sat her horse very still beneath the motionless limes and felt the ground. She thought she had understood tilt quietly beneath her, because she had come out expecting to catch him in a cold transaction, and instead he had handed her open, palm the shape of his own ruin, and she did not yet know whether what she held was the truth or only the next careful slice of it cut to the exact size of her sympathy. "Why tell me this now," she said, "when you might have kept it for later and bound me first?" "Because Pell reached you before I did," said Mr. Wren. "And a man who lets another tell his wife the truth has already lost her." He paused. "And because I find God help my poor strategy, that I would rather you came to this with both eyes open and refused me than walked into it blind and were bound. That is not arithmetic. I do not know what it is. I have not had the leisure to find out." And before she could answer, before she could so much as draw the breath the answer would need, there came the sound of hooves on the empty track behind them. Many hooves, unhurried, fashionable an hour too early for anyone honest. Cordelia turned in the saddle and saw riding down the limes through the gray morning light the Earl of Marion on his bay, and at his side mounted side saddle on a glossy chestnut, and smiling beneath a peacock-feathered hat, the unmistakable triumphant figure of Mrs. Selina Harkness. Mrs. Harkness reached them first. She brought her chestnut up across the track with the easy seat of a woman who rode well and knew she was watched, and she let the silence sit a moment before she spent it, the peacock feather trembling in the windless heat. Lady Cordelia. And so early. One hears such things at the park before breakfast. Her voice was honey, poured slow warm at the surface and thick beneath. She was a handsome woman of perhaps 30, with auburn hair and a wide, soft mouth made for saying cruel things sweetly, and her eyes went from Cordelia's face to the bareheaded man beside her, and brightened with a frank, acquisitive interest. "I do not think we have been presented to your friend." "You have not," Cordelia said. Marion had drawn up his bay a half-length behind, and the color was already climbing his throat because he had recognized the plain dark coat and the black horse and the carriage of the man who wore them. "Selina," he said, "let us ride on." "Ride on when we are only just arrived." Mrs. Harkness laughed a pretty sound. "Crispin, do not be tiresome. Present me." "That will not be necessary," said Mr. Wren. He had not raised his voice. He sat his horse with his hands quiet on the rein and looked at the two of them with the same unhurried attention he had turned on a violet sky through glass, and something in the look made the widow's smile falter at one corner, the way a flame stutters in a draught it cannot find. "His lordship knows who I am," he went on, "which is why he has gone the color of his own coat. As for you, madam," the dark eyes moved over the peacock feather and the glossy chestnut, and the triumph she had worn out into the morning like a second gown, "I find I do not need to be presented to you at all. I have had the whole of you described to me already, and the description was generous." The blackbird started up again somewhere in the limes, careless of them all. "You are foreign," Mrs. Harkness said, and the honey had thinned. "I am he, agreed. It is among my smaller faults." He gathered the rein. "Lady Cordelia, the dew is going off the grass, and the fashionable hour will be upon us directly. I think we have given the park enough to talk of for one morning." But Marion had found his courage in the worst place, as he always did, and he pushed the bay forward a step. "You do not know what you are about," he said, and it was Cordelia he said it to, his fair face working. "This is not a match. It is a card played in a game whose table you cannot see. He will use you and set you down, and there will be no coming back from it. No quiet retirement. Nothing. At least with me." "At least with you," Cordelia said. "I should have had a primrose chamber and the privilege of watching you choose the curtains for another woman." "Yes. I remember the offer." She turned her gray eyes on him, gone very nearly gold in the early light, and her voice did not lift at all, which made it worse. You came to the park this morning to be seen forgiving me, Crispin, to ride past and pity me, and carry the pity home to your set like a trophy. And instead, you find me beneath the limes with a claimant to a barony, and you cannot bear it, and so you call it concern. Go home. Choose your curtains. You are very good at choosing things you will never have to live with. The chestnut sidled. The peacock feather had gone quite still. Crispin said the widow, and now there was a new note in the honey, cool and calculating. You did not tell me it had gone so far as this. It has not gone anywhere, Marion said desperately. It has gone all the way to a claimant, to a barony beneath the trees. At 7:30, said Mr. Wren pleasantly. But by all means tell yourselves otherwise. He inclined his bare head a precise degree. We shall meet again, I do not doubt, in a warmer room. There is a great deal of society before us, all this autumn, and I mean my future wife to be very much seen. His lordship, I think, will have an excellent view. Good morning to you both. And he turned the black horse and walked it away, beneath the limes without haste, and Cordelia turned hers and went with him, and she felt the two of them at her back like a heat on her shoulders all the long way down the green ride, and she did not look round once. The small, dry pleasure of it carried her nearly to the gates before the larger fear came back to claim her. You enjoyed that, she said. I did, Mr. Wren admitted. It was beneath me, and I enjoyed it entirely. I shall do penance later. A muscle moved at the corner of his mouth. Your Earl chooses his moments the way a man chooses the one chair in a room that will tip him onto the floor. I almost feel for him, almost. It surprised a breath of laughter out of her there in the gray morning, and she saw him mark where it fell, the way a man marks where a coin has dropped. And this time she let it stand. But the ease lasted only as far as the open gate, where a young man in the gray and bottle-green livery waited with a face too carefully blank and a folded paper in his hand, and the morning closed over her head again, like water. The paper was for Mr. Wren, not for her, and she watched him read it on horseback in the flat gold light at the park gate. Watched the ground. A smile had nearly stood on. Go hard and level. Again watched the coin reassemble itself, feature by feature, until the man she had ridden out with was gone and the claimant sat in his place. What is it, she said. Not a question. She had learned in a single week of being lied to by tender men the particular stillness that comes before the next careful slice is cut. A ship put in at Bristol on the evening tide 2 days since, Mr. Wren said. He folded the paper twice with great economy, and a traveling carriage came up from the west through the night and was admitted before dawn this morning to a house in Bryanston Square. A house leased a fortnight ago through an agent in a name that means nothing. Pell's hand is behind the lease. It would be. He looked at her. Miss Cassandra Vane is in London. Lady Cordelia. She came up from the Bristol packet while you and I were watching a blackbird. The heat pressed down. Somewhere beyond the railings, the city was waking a cart. A cry, the iron clatter of a shop's shutters going up, and Cordelia sat her horse and felt every separate sound of it land on her skin. She has come for you, she said. She has come for the estate. I am merely where it is kept. He gathered the rein. Go home. Say nothing to your father yet. He will price it and frighten himself. I must learn what she means to do, and I have a day at most before the whole of society learns she is here and writes the rest of the story for us. For an instant, the level voice cracked just once, like ice over moving water. Cordelia, whatever you are told today, and you will be told a great deal, and some of it will be true, hold to nothing until you have had it from me. Will you promise me that much? You ask me to trust the one man who has admitted to telling me the truth in pieces. I ask you to trust the man who is telling you that which is not. Nothing, he said. It is the only honest thing I have to offer you before tonight, and I am offering it. Will you take it? She thought of Sybil in the hall. Keep one foot on the ground, child. She thought of the snick of the shears, and of how very tired she was of choosing which man to believe. I will take it as far as Bryanston Square, she said. No farther. And she turned her horse for home, and behind her she heard him sit a moment in the rising heat before he rode the other way toward whatever of Vane had crossed the country to do to him. The card came at noon, and it was not for Mr. Wren. Miss Cassandra Vane requests the honor of half an hour of Lady Cordelia Ravenshaw's time this afternoon at 4 at her house in Bryanston Square. Miss Vane trusts her ladyship will see the wisdom of coming alone and the discourtesy of refusing. "You will not go," her father said. He had the card in both hands, and his face had gone the gray it wore now as a matter of course. "Cordelia, you will not." A summons. A summons to a stranger's house alone. "No, I forbid it." "You forbade me the Marion match too," Papa Cordelia said gently, "in the end, and a great deal of good it did either of us." She took the card from him. The hand was upright and hard, the downstrokes pressed deep into the paper. The discourtesy of refusing. "She has named the field and the hour. If I do not come, she will write it that I was afraid to, and that story will reach every drawing room before I do. I would rather meet her with my own face on than let her draw me one." Sybil, from the window seat, where she had installed herself, with her glass and a flat refusal to be sent away, made a low sound in her throat. "She is right, Ravenshaw, and you know it and you hate it. The girl cannot win this from behind a door." The old woman heaved round. "But you do not go alone, Cordelia Summons, or no. I shall sit in the carriage at the curb the whole half hour, and if you are not out by 4:30, I shall come up those steps myself and make such a noise as Bryanston Square has not heard in its short genteel life. A foreign countess is one thing. An English aunt in a temper is a force no house in Europe has yet found the answer to." Despite the cold weight under her stays, Cordelia crossed the room and kissed the powdered cheek. "You are the only general I trust," she said. "I am the only one who has lost as many battles as you are about to," said Sybil, "and survived to be rude about it. Go and dress. Wear the garnets. Let us see you are not a girl she can frighten with good furniture." The house in Bryanston Square was tall and pale, and shut the blinds half drawn against the 4 o'clock glare. And within it was cool and bare and smelled of beeswax, newly applied and underneath of a house that had stood empty until a fortnight since that faint, closed mineral smell of unaired rooms. A servant who did not speak led Cordelia up a staircase that carried no pictures into a drawing room where the furniture still wore its holland covers on every piece, but two, and where a woman stood at the window with her back to the door, slender and very straight, in a gown of dove gray, so plain it was its own kind of arrogance. She turned, and Cordelia understood with a small, inward drop that here was the most beautiful woman she had ever stood in a room with. Pale gold hair drawn smooth, a face of cold, flawless symmetry, eyes the gray of a winter sea, and a stillness in her that made Cordelia's own hard-won composure feel a thing learned only that morning. So said Miss Cassandra Vane. Her English was exact, each consonant set down like a coin on a counter. "You are the Englishwoman. I am Cordelia Ravenshaw. You are a name an empty house has hung itself upon. I have read your father's accounts. They make sad reading." She moved to a covered chair and did not uncover it and did not offer one. "Sit, if you wish. I shall not be long, and I think you will not wish to sit when I have finished, so perhaps you had better stand and have the journey already made." "I will stand," Cordelia said, "since you have arranged the room so kindly to require it." Something passed across the perfect face, not a smile, but the cold acknowledgment of a blow well placed. "He told me you had a tongue. I was right in that, at least, among the many things he has been wrong in." Mr. Wren. Miss Vane said the name the way one says the name of a place one owns. "You imagine I have come to plead with you, to weep perhaps, and show you a wronged woman's heart, and beg you to step aside." She drew off one gray glove finger by finger, that same lawyer's mannerism, and laid it on the holland cover. "I have not. I have come to show you a letter." The cold came up through the bare boards into Cordelia's thin slippers, and she stood very straight in her garnets and her brandy-colored silk, and watched Miss Vane draw a folded sheet from a writing case on the covered table. A sheet, creased soft with carrying its red seal broken. "You will know his hand," Miss Vane said. "You have had what, 2 notes of it?" "3. I have had 11 years of it. I could draw you every letter of it blind." She did not give the sheet into Cordelia's hand. She held it up open at the length of her arm so that Cordelia must come to it, must close the distance herself. And Cordelia came, because to refuse was to be afraid and read. It was his hand. There was no mistaking the spare, upright strokes she had seen close a note with a single initial. The letter was dated in April, 4 months gone from a house in Jamaica, and it was addressed to "My dear Cassandra," and her eye went down it the way a foot goes down a dark stair, finding each tread by the falling. "And you are right that the matter cannot rest in the air much longer. My father's friends press me, and yours press you, and we are neither of us children to pretend the thing has not been understood between our houses since we were both in the schoolroom. I will not insult you with the language of romance. You would laugh at me, and rightly. But I know of no woman I would sooner see steady what is coming to us both. When I am returned from England, we will make an end of the waiting. You have my word on it, which you know I do not give twice. Your servant, always. G. Your servant always." The room tilted very quietly, the way the park had tilted beneath the limes. Only this time there was nothing open-palmed held out to catch her. Cordelia stood with the cold coming up through her slippers and read the 2 words again and heard underneath them perfectly preserved Marion in a rose garden. "You signed them. Your servant, always, always you used the word." And the small flame she had felt kindle that morning on the ride home was pinched out between 2 fingers. "Yes," said Miss Vane, softly watching her face with the attention of a woman reading an instrument. "I thought you would know that phrase. It is his. He spends it carefully. He will have spent it on you too, I do not doubt, in some prettier dress." She folded the letter and put it away. "He wrote that to me in April. In June, he crossed to your country. In August, he stood beneath some glass-house roof and decided that a ruined Englishwoman with an old name and a desperate father would make a sharper weapon against my family than a marriage to me would make a bridle upon him. That is all you are, Lady Cordelia. You are the knife he chose because it was cheaper than the sword." "You have told me a date," Cordelia said. Her voice came out level. She did not know how. "April. You have shown me a letter 4 months stale. He told me himself only this morning that your understanding was never an alliance, but a bridle that your family means to hold, an estate that is not lawfully yours, and that he came to England to break it. You have shown me nothing he did not say first." The winter-gray eyes did not waver. "Did he tell you," said Miss Vane, "that he knew the Earl of Marion meant to set you aside before the Earl had done it?" The 4 o'clock glare lay flat and gold across the Holland covers, and outside in the square a horse stamped, and a child laughed, and a bell somewhere struck the quarter, and Cordelia stood in the cold, bare room and felt the question go into her like the seam of a pearl button pressed too hard. "That is a lie," she said. "It is the one thing in this room that is not." Miss Vane took up her glove again and drew it on finger by finger, unhurried. "Mr. Pell keeps men about the town. It is his particular art. They knew of Mrs. Harkness before your own mother did. They knew the Earl would cry off once the wedding breakfast was spoken of. These things leave a trail, Lady Cordelia. A debt paid. A widow's bills suddenly settled by a lordly hand. Mr. Wren came to the Roxwell ball because he knew you would be there, freshly broken and freshly useful. The orangery was not chance. Nothing he does is chance. He chose the hour and the room and the green light and the line." She looked at Cordelia with something that was very nearly for one cold instant pity. "You walk as though it were your own ground. That is a fine thing to have said to you. It is a finer thing to have chosen to say, the way a hand upon a stage chooses its mark. A man who feeds you the truth in pieces is not being honest. I is being careful that no single piece is large enough to make you run before the trap is sprung. I have given you the whole of it at once. Now do as you like with it. The carriage will see you down. Good afternoon. She did not remember the stair, or the silent servant, or the door. She remembered the heat of the square coming up off the paving like an open oven after the cold of the house, and the blessed sight of her aunt's wide, handsome face at the carriage window, and then the lurch and rattle of the wheels, and Sybil's voice somewhere above her saying, "Child, child, what has she done to you?" "She showed me a letter," Cordelia heard herself say. "April, your servant always." He wrote it to her in April. The words came out flat and small. It is Marian's phrase. It is the very phrase. 2 men. The same 2 words. And I believed it both times. A letter 4 months old proves nothing but that he was once where every man of his affairs is got to be, Sybil said sharply, gripping her wrist. What else? There is worse. I can see it on you. What else did the cold creature say? So, Cordelia told her. The men about the town. Since the spring, the trail of a debt paid and a widow's bills settled, the orangery chosen, like a mark upon a stage, the line delivered to land. And Sybil listened with her glass forgotten in her lap, and her black wig, more crooked than Cordelia had ever seen it. And when it was done, the old woman sat back against the squabs and was silent for the length of 3 streets, which from Sybil was a thing more frightening than any speech. "It hangs together too well," she said at last. "That is what makes it true. No, child, that is what makes it built." Sybil's small, bright eyes had gone hard and shrewd. A thing that hangs together perfectly has been made to hang together. Life does not come so neat. That woman gave you a story with no loose thread in it, no place where it does not quite meet. And a true thing always has such a place, because the truth is clumsy and only a lie is tidy. She wants you frightened off by tonight, and she has built you the exact machine to do it. The old woman gripped her hand harder. But here is the devil of it, and you must hear the whole. Built does not mean false. The most dangerous lie in the world is the one assembled out of true things. He may indeed have known of your jilting. He may indeed have chosen that orangery. And it may still be true that he saddled his horse this morning and told you a thing he had no strategy for telling. Both at once. That is the country you are marrying into, where every truth is also a weapon, and you will never again hold one without cutting your hand. The carriage swung into their own street, and a church bell came over the rooftops, bright and careless, ringing the half-hour for nobody. And Cordelia sat with her empty hands open in her lap, and found that for the first time the sound did not steady her and did not frighten her either. It simply rang indifferent over a city full of people arranging themselves before they wounded her. "I have to ask him," she said. "You have to ask him," Sybil agreed grimly. "And you have to watch his face while you do it, and you will not be able to read it because a man who has handed out the truth in slices for 30 years has a face like a shut bank. And then you will have to choose anyway tonight on no better ground than your own judgment of a stranger." She patted the cold hand once roughly. "And here is the last cruelty of it, which I would spare you if I could. You will never have your proof. Not of the thing that matters. You may prove her a liar or prove her honest about the dates and the debts, but whether that man means one warm word he says to you that you will never hold in your hand on paper. That you must simply decide. Welcome to it. This is what they never tell a girl at her first ball. The whole of being a woman of sense is choosing in the dark and answering for it in the daylight." He came at 8 that evening when the light was going amber over the square, and that he came at all when a man with a suit to win had 100 more useful places to be told her something before he had said a word. She received him alone by her own arrangement in the small back parlor, with no fire lit against the summer warmth and only a branch of candles burning, and she stood with her back to the cold hearth in her amber silk, with the garnets dark as old wine at her throat. And she did not sit, and did not offer him a chair, and she watched him take in the arrangement of the room, the deliberate echo of Bryanston Square, and understand it. "You have seen Miss Vane," he said. At 4 by summons. She arranged a room very like this one to make her point. So I have returned the compliment. He set his hat and gloves on the side table and did not move toward her. Ask me, he said. You did not put out the covers on the chairs to admire them. She showed me a letter in your hand, Cordelia said. April. My dear Cassandra, your servant always. Did you write it? I did. She kept her eyes on the struck coin of his face, hunting the place where it would not quite meet the clumsy true seam Sybil had taught her to look for. She says you knew the Earl meant to set me aside before he did it, that Pell's men had it from the town in the spring, that the orangery was not chance, that you chose the hour and the room and the green light and the very line you said to me, the way a hand upon a stage chooses its mark, because I was freshly broken and freshly useful and a cheaper weapon than a sword. Tell me she lied. Tell me it was chance. Tell me one thing plainly all at once, with no careful slice of it kept back for later, and look at me while you do it. And she watched the shut bank of his face, and she saw the thing she had been most afraid of, which was that it did not flinch. I cannot tell you it was chance, Mr. Wren said quietly, because it was not. The candles burned. Somewhere in the house, a clock she could not see ticked into the silence. I knew of Mrs. Harkness in May, he went on, and he did not look away, and that was either the worst of him or the best, and she could not tell which was the whole of the misery. I keep an agent in London for the suit, and it is his business to know what the town knows, and the town knew the widow's bills were paid by a lordly hand before your mother had poured the man his tea. I knew a wedding breakfast spoken of means a wedding and what it would do to you. I knew you would be at the Roxwell ball because a woman of your name does not hide on the first night. And I went into that orangery to wait for you because I had been told you were the strongest woman in London going spare, and I needed exactly that, and I meant to have her. All of it is true. She built her machine well because she built it out of true things. He took one step nearer, and the candlelight moved over him. And the line was not a line. I have watched 1,000 people walk into 1,000 rooms, and I said to you the truest thing I had seen in 3 weeks, and I would say it again now on no stage with nothing to gain by it, because in an hour you will either have me or you will not. And either way, it will have been true. You do walk as though it were your own ground. I did not invent that to catch you. I only used a true thing to do it. That is the worst of me, Cordelia. I will not pretend it is better than it is. I use true things. I have never in my life had the leisure to do otherwise. And the letter, she said, and her voice had gone very low. Your servant always to her in April. To me, you have never once signed a single soft word, and now I know why. Because you had already spent them 4 months gone on the woman whose ruin I am to be. For the first time, the seam showed. It was small, and it was at the corner of his eyes, and it was the place where the machine did not quite meet. And she could not for her life tell whether it was grief or only the very best performance of grief. I wrote that letter, he said, to a woman I have since learned is the whole hinge of the scheme that means to keep me from what is mine. I wrote your servant always to my enemy, because in April I did not yet know she was my enemy. I thought her only a tiresome old arrangement I should have to disappoint, and the words cost me nothing because I did not mean them. To you I have signed nothing soft, because to you, God help me, I have not dared to mean it and find it false. The empty words I gave her freely. The full ones I have kept back, because I did not dare to spend them until I knew. He spread his hands, and they were empty. Believe that or do not. I have no sign of paper to prove a thing I have refused to write down. There is your whole truth all at once, with nothing kept back. I have never given it to anyone in my life, and I find it is far worse than the careful way. Now you know why I never learned to do it otherwise. From the front of this house came the sound of wheels and a knock, and her father's voice rising, and Cordelia stood with her back to the cold hearth and looked at the man who had handed her at last the whole of himself, and could not tell the gold of it from the brass, and understood that she never would. That this was the choosing in the dark Sybil had promised, and that there would be no daylight in which to be sure. "I cannot answer you tonight," she said. "I did not come for an answer tonight," said Mr. Wren. "I came so that when you gave one, it would not be to a lie." He took up his hat. "There is a thing I would ask of you, and you are free to refuse it. Miss Vane's claim rests on a deed drawn, as she says 30 years ago, that gives the Raysbury estate to the Vane branch. I have always believed it forged. My lawyers have battered at it for a year and found no crack because the men who made it were careful men." He paused at the door. "But careful men were not what stood in the orangery and told me the truth. You asked me this morning why I wanted a woman who reckons. That deed is lodged now with the commission, where any party to the cause may take an office copy of it. I have read it 40 times and seen nothing. I do not think I am the man to see it. I think perhaps you are." He inclined his head. "Good night, Lady Cordelia. Whatever you decide, your father's debts are paid tomorrow morning, and that is not a bargain. It is only a thing I find I wish to do." And he was gone, and she stood a long while in the candlelight, with the whole weight of the choosing on her, and then, because she was who she was, she sent a note to his lawyers before her courage cooled, asking for the office copy of the deed. It came the next forenoon, a fair clerk's copy with the commission's stamp upon the wrapper, and with it, at her particular request, the sworn description of the original, drawn up by the officer who had received it into the record, every particular of the physical document, set down as the law required. Cordelia cleared her father's library table and laid the two things side by side and began in the way she had always had to reckon. She did not know the law, but she knew ledgers, and she knew that a lie, like a badly kept account, is undone not by its great figures but by its small ones. She read the deed through once for its sense, and it was exactly as Miss Vane had said. A settlement of the Clarendon estate upon the Vane branch, dated the spring of 1819, witnessed and sealed and perfectly in order. She read it a second time for its edges, and it was in the officer's sworn description of the original, and not in the sense of the thing at all, that the small figure sat waiting for her. The paper of the original. The officer had noted, as officers were required to note, bore the maker's watermark, and he had copied it faithfully. A device, and beneath it a year woven into the sheet in the manner of the great English mills. And the year woven into that sheet was 1832. Cordelia sat very still. She was the daughter of a house that had bought its paper from the same stationer for 40 years, and she knew, as any woman who keeps a great household's accounts must, that the mills wove the year of a paper's making into the sheet, and had done since a law passed in her grandfather's time to govern the duty on it. A deed could be dated any year a forger pleased, but the paper it was written upon could not be older than the mill that made it. A settlement sworn to have been drawn and signed and sealed in the spring of 1819 had been written upon a sheet that did not exist until 13 years later. The men who made the thing had been careful of every figure a lawyer would look at, and blind to the one figure only a stationer or a housekeeper would ever think to read. She sat back and pressed two fingers to the garnets at her throat, and her heart went hard and slow. It was not proof of the great thing. It would never be proof of the great thing, of whether one grave man meant one warm word. But it was proof of a lie, a whole lie built like all his truths out of careful parts, and undone by one part too many. And it was hers, found by her own eye on her own ground. She did not stop there because she was thorough, and it had never once cost her anything to be thorough. That mattered. Over the next 2 days she went where the trail led. To the stationer whose mark was on the sheet, a dry civil man in a shop off Chancery Lane, who consulted his book and told her, for a consideration, that a quantity of that very paper had been sold in the spring of the present year, to a clerk on the account of a Mr. Pell, and to a country clergyman's records, where a marriage the whole Vane pedigree hung upon a marriage 30 and more years past, on which the legitimacy of the senior branch depended, was set down not in the church at all, but as a hasty private ceremony, without banns, without license, of exactly the sort a famous old law of the last century had declared no marriage whatever, and the children of it in the plain, cold eye of that law, no heirs. The forged deed had been drawn to paper over that very crack, to give by a false settlement what the bloodline could not lawfully claim. She laid it all out on her father's table and understood that she held not a bride's plea, but a lawyer's ruin, and that Josiah Pell, who had come to her drawing room to do her the courtesy of the whole truth, at once had wound his careful machine exactly one turn too tight. She did not take it to Mr. Wren. She took it first to no one. She sat with it a night and chose. The autumn came on, and with it the day the commission would begin to hear the Raysbury cause, and on the eve of it, Lord Harlestone, whose house stood on the river within sight of the Palace of Westminster, gave the great assembly at which the whole of the interested world would gather the commissioners among them before the doors of the law opened in the morning. It was the 16th of October. Cordelia dressed for it as for a battle in deep midnight silk sewn over with seed pearl, the garnets dark at her throat, and her Aunt Sybil rode with her emeralds blazing black wig, for once set straight and said only one last time at the door of the carriage, "Keep one foot on the ground, child," and then more quietly, "But do the rest of it standing, and let the wounding be theirs tonight." They smelled the smoke before they saw the glow. Then the carriage came round toward the river, and the whole eastern sky stood up red and roaring over the rooftops, and the streets were full of people running the wrong way toward it, faces lit and strange, and a man at the curb was shouting that the Parliament House was afire, the old palace itself, both houses going up together like a rick in August. The Harlestone windows blazed no brighter than the sky behind them, and the guests stood clustered at the riverfront watching the lords and the commons burn, and into that hot, unnatural light on no one's arm, Cordelia walked. Mr. Wren was there plainly dressed among the gold lace, and Pell was there silver and exact, and Miss Cassandra Vane was there, and she had dressed for war. Where Cordelia wore midnight, Miss Vane wore stark, flawless white, sewn with diamonds that threw back the red firelight in cold splinters, and the room, half of it already turned to the burning sky, turned now the other way to her as she came down upon them with Pell at her shoulder and grief arranged upon her perfect face. She did not accuse. She was far too clever to accuse. She stopped in the cleared space near the windows where the commissioners stood, and she let the firelight and the silence do their work. And then she spoke, and her exact voice carried to the furthest corner over the distant roar of the flames. "Mr. Wren." She let the name fall. "You will forgive an old friend her plainness on such a night. I have crossed an ocean upon the strength of a letter in your own hand, and I find on my arrival that London has busied itself marrying you to a stranger." She let her winter gaze travel slow and pitiless over Cordelia's midnight gown and her garnets that were not diamonds. "I had thought between our two houses there was an understanding too old and too deep to be set aside for an autumn's English novelty. I ask these gentlemen only this: is a man who breaks his sworn and written word to one woman a man whose bare word upon a great estate may be relied on by any? It was, Cordelia saw, beautifully made. She had not accused Mr. Wren of a single thing that could be answered. She had grieved publicly with a wronged woman's dignity, and in grieving had hung the whole question in the firelit air before the very men who would decide the cause in the morning. To deny the letter was to call her a liar before the commissioners. To own it was to stand confessed as faithless. And she saw Mr. Wren draw the breath to answer, and saw that there was no answer he could give that would not make it worse. And she stepped forward herself into the cleared space, alone where the firelight fell reddest. "Miss Vane," Cordelia said, and her voice did not lift, and the not lifting made the room lean to hear it over the flames. "You speak of a letter written in April, and you are right too. I have read it, your servant always. A graceful phrase. I have some small acquaintance with it as it happens. I was given the very same words once in a rose garden by a gentleman who I believe is in this room tonight." She did not look at Marian. She did not need to. The whole room looked for her and found him against the wall, gone the gray of ash. So I know exactly what such a phrase is worth and exactly what it weighs. And I will tell this company plainly. It weighs nothing at all. It is the coin men spend when they have nothing dearer in the purse. You have crossed an ocean to show a 4-month letter full of empty words to a woman who was taught the price of empty words in her own father's garden this summer. I am the last woman in England you could frighten with one. The diamonds at Miss Vane's bodice trembled once with her breath. You make light of a sworn understanding, she said. No, Cordelia said. I make light of you, which is a different thing, and I will tell these gentlemen why. She turned so that she spoke now not to Miss Vane, but to the commissioner's grave men, lit red by a burning parliament, and she felt the cold, clear engine of her own mind take hold the very thing 2 men had counted against her, and one had counted her whole worth. A wronged woman with an honest claim has the whole law of England in which to seek her remedy, she said. She has this very commission. She has the courts. She does not need to come up by night from the Bristol packet to a house leased through an agent in a false name, with the blinds drawn against the day, to summon a private gentlewoman alone to a room stripped to its Holland covers and their work upon her in the dark. I ask this company a single question. Is that the conduct of a wronged and honest woman appealing to justice? Or of an agent sent ahead of a false claim to remove an obstacle before it can be made safe? A stir ran through the firelit room. She had struck something and she pressed it. And I will give this commission more than a question, Cordelia said, because I was raised to keep accounts, and an account is only worth the figures you can show. She drew from her reticule the office copy folded small, and the stationer's note with it, and she held them up in the red light. Miss Vane's whole claim and Mr. Pell's rests upon a deed of settlement sworn and lodged with these very gentlemen, dated the spring of 1819. I have here the commission's own office copy of it and the officer's sworn description of the original. And the original gentleman is written upon a sheet of paper into which the maker wove as the law has required of the paper mills since before I was born the year of its making. That year is 1832. She let it fall into the roar of the distant fire. A deed cannot be signed 13 years before the paper it is written upon was made. The men who forged it were careful of every figure a lawyer would read, and blind to the one figure a housekeeper reads every quarter day. And the stationer, whose mark is in that sheet, has told me and will tell you that he sold the paper this very spring to a clerk upon the account of Mr. Josiah Pell. The silence now was a different silence. Pell had gone very still indeed. Cordelia turned to him and did not raise her voice. You overreach, Lady Cordelia, the lawyer said softly. These are grave words to fling about in a room of gentlemen. They are. Cordelia agreed. And I notice it is you who answers them, Mr. Pell, and not Miss Vane. You who keep men about the town who knew of my jilting before my own mother did. You who leased the empty house. You who came to my father's drawing room to do me the courtesy of the whole truth at once, so that I might be frightened off, and a great fraud spared the light. She smiled, and it was not a kind smile, and the room saw it. You told me a thing I have thought about a great deal since, that a man who feeds the truth in slices ought not to be trusted. I have come to think you were right. It is only that you told it of the wrong man. A true thing is clumsy, sir, and only a lie is tidy, and yours was a very tidy machine. You wound it one turn too tight. And then Mr. Wren moved. He came to stand at Cordelia's shoulder, and when he spoke, his voice had the flat finality she had heard him use upon Mrs. Harkness beneath the limes, the voice that did not need to be raised, because nothing in the room would dare to cover it. The settlement of 1819 is a forgery, he said, drawn this present year upon this present year's paper, to keep from my family an estate taken from it by a lie a generation ago. Behind it lies a marriage. The law of this country has held these 80 years to be no marriage at all, and a line of claimants who are in its plain, cold eye, no heirs. I spent 4 years and the better part of my fortune trying to prove it, and my lawyers could not, because they looked where lawyers look. He turned his head and looked at Cordelia, and the struck coin of his face cracked clean down its seam, and this time he made no attempt to fold it away. And then this lady proved it in an afternoon, at her father's table, with nothing in her hand but her own clear eye. "Mr. Pell, you came to frighten a gentlewoman out of a marriage. You will find you have armed her instead." Pell's pale composure had thinned to a blade's edge, and then, as a lawyer will who has read the figures and knows the sum, it closed over into the blank-shut face of a bank with nothing left in the vault. He said only very low, "We will withdraw the claim, and the commissioners will hear no more of it tonight," and he reached for Miss Vane's elbow. "Come away, Cassandra. We are finished here." "In a moment," said Miss Vane, and shook off the gloved hand. She crossed the cleared floor alone past the grave commissioners and the burning windows, and she stopped before Cordelia, and she drew from the bosom of her white gown the soft creased letter with its broken seal, and she held it out, not at arm's length now, but openly on her flat pale palm for the taking. "Keep it," she said, and only Cordelia and Mr. Wren stood near enough to hear. "Your servant always. You were right. It weighs nothing. I have carried it 11 years, and it has cost me everything I might have been, and I find I do not want it across the country with me." For the briefest instant, the winter-gray eyes thawed, and Cordelia saw in the beautiful ruined face a thing she had not looked to find, which was that Cassandra Vane, too, had been fitted young to a bridle and made a weapon in another's hand, and never once in all her life been offered a door. "He has handed you a door," she said. "No one ever handed me one. Walk through it well." She inclined her gold head a precise degree to Cordelia and not to Mr. Wren, and she turned and went up the room through the parting crowd with her spine straight as a sword. And Pell went after her, his pale, exact face a closed and empty book, and the firelight took them both as they passed out into the roaring red night, and the scheme that had been 30 years in the laying went out into the dark with nothing in its hands. Cordelia unfolded the letter there beside him in the light of the burning Parliament and found the last line her eye had skipped in the cold of Bryanston Square. "Below your servant always in the spare, upright strokes," he had written, "though I think you and I shall never learn the trick of meaning it, which is perhaps the saddest thing our two houses have made of us." "You wrote that to your enemy," she said. "I did not know she was my enemy. I knew only that neither of us had ever once in our lives been let to mean a word." He looked at the line over her shoulder, and his jaw moved. "I have spent a great deal of this autumn learning to mean things, Cordelia. I find it is far worse than the careful way. I'm not going back to the careful way." Across the room, against the wall, the Earl of Marion rose from where he had stood the whole while, forgotten. For one moment Cordelia thought he meant to come to her to make some last speech of warning or of grief, and she braced for it. But the room had turned. The whole hot weight of society had turned toward the claimant, who was a claimant no longer, and away from the fair man against the wall, and Marion stood in the middle of his own smallness, and found that there was no one looking at him at all. Mrs. Harkness was already gathering her peacock skirts, already glancing toward the doors, already reckoning Cordelia saw the cost of having been seen all season on the arm of a man whose great friend had just been proved a forger's tool. The widow caught Cordelia's eye across the firelit room and dropped her a curtsy, small and exact, the curtsy one gives a woman one has badly misjudged, and steered Marion toward the side door. The door for those who leave before they are asked to. He put his gray hat on his fair head before he had reached it, the old careless habit, the last small insult to himself, and was gone. "He will tell his set he wished us joy," Cordelia said. "He will tell his set a great many things," said Mr. Wren, and drew her hand back through his arm, and the room began to breathe and glitter and move again, and beyond the windows, the old palace of Westminster burned on into the night, throwing its red, uncaring light over the just and the unjust alike, over a woman who had walked out of a rose garden in August with nothing, and stood now in October upon ground that was entirely her own. They were married in the country as the first frost silvered the Kent hedges quietly. Her father restored to vanity and cheerfulness, with his debts paid entire, and his house standing weeping without shame into a handkerchief the size of a tablecloth. In the spring, the commission confirmed the Clarendon estate and the barony to Mr. Wren, who was Mr. Wren no longer, and the ready money of the freedom claim came with it. And on the evening the news arrived, he laid the letter of it on the table between them, and did not smile. "It is not clean," he said. "I told you it never would be, and it is worse now that it is real and in our hands. I do not yet know what a man ought to do who is paid for people his grandfather owned. I know only that I would rather reckon what to do with it beside you than decide it alone. You are the only person I have ever met whom I trust to help me count a thing this heavy honestly." It was the following summer in the gardens at Ravenshaw Court in Kent that the story found its quiet ending. The English summer came in kind and green, smelling of cut grass and warm brick, and Cordelia sat in the shade of a lime walk with a dish of cherries beside her and a letter from her Aunt Sybil, open in her lap, full of London scandal, and the news that the Earl of Marion and Mrs. Harkness were married at last, and were said to quarrel beautifully. Somewhere down the long green walk, a gardener's shears went, snick, snick, patient and indifferent, the very sound that had once measured out the worst afternoon of her life among another garden's roses. She listened to it now and found it had become only a sound a garden makes, and she ate a cherry and was content. A shadow fell across the page. Her husband came down the lime walk bareheaded in his shirt sleeves, the struck coin of his face wearing the small new seam at the corner that a year of learning to mean things had worn permanently into it, and he sat beside her on the warm stone and took a cherry without asking. "There is a letter from the lawyers," he said, "about the Clarendon money. They have found me 3 schemes for it, each more ingenious than the last, and I have understood perhaps a third of any of them, and I mean to bring the whole of it to you tonight and lay it on the table and have you go through it with me figure by figure, because they are clever men, and I do not trust clever men to be honest with a thing this heavy on their own." "And can you follow it at all?" Cordelia asked gravely, reaching for another cherry. "Or shall I send for a stronger candle and a great deal of patience?" "I can follow most of it," he said, and looked at her, and the seam at the corner of his eyes deepened into something that was at last unmistakably and entirely a smile. "I have been practicing. I find I would rather reckon a hard thing with you than an easy one alone. It is the one accomplishment your Earl and I have never shared, and I mean to keep it." She laughed, the full laugh, the one she had given no one in the week. Her old life ended, the one he had marked, falling in an orangery, and had spent a year learning to earn on purpose and down the lime walk. The shears went snick, snick in the warm, bright air, and from the house a clock began to strike the half-hour, careless and golden, over a garden that was wholly her own, ringing, this time, she thought, for somebody after all.